Murdorf and the Mortal Flaw. Book 1, The Uniting. Chapter 1, Shilly, Shally, 4. Elk had lingered at the river longer than he should have, hoping for another fish to bite. Now he was rushing to beat the oncoming darkness. The last glimmer of daylight was about to be swallowed up by night as Elk hurried down the dirt road, the dust clinging to his peculiar upturned toes that stuck out from his worn-out sandals. In his hands he clutched his old red fishing rod and 2 fish. His unkempt amber hair was sticky with a combination of sweat and dirt, evidence of a day of fun by the river. A shimmer of orange rays shone upon his freckled face as he hurried to outrun the encroaching darkness. He had taken Shilly Shally 4, a long, lonely road that wound its way through the deep forest and into the city of Seir, in the land of Shally. Its isolated nature had a history of giving rise to potential dangers. Therein lied the possibility of falling into the hands of greedy bandits or coming face to face with wild animals. Darkness sprang upon him quickly, overtaking the comfort of the light. Now, these fears deepened under the obscurity of the night. As the sun vanished and a slither of moonlight shone upon the path, so too did haunting shadows. Shrouded in a canopy of darkness, silhouettes lurked behind the trees, lying in wait for the anxious lad. 4 bulging eyeballs peered through the thick forest, scouting Elk's every move. Red spider veins in the whites of their wide eyes pulsated with mischief as the depraved creatures devised a plan against him, spurred only by their own boredom and innate wickedness. 2 derves, nefarious creatures to the very core of their being, inherently and irredeemably wicked, had found an easy prey. Thin sprigs of hair randomly scattered across their heads were insufficient to conceal the raised purplish red veins beneath their ghostly skin. Although small in stature, hardly reaching a man's waist, derves were vicious creatures capable of the most brutal of crimes. They were intelligent, able to plan and plot, and competent of making cunning and calculated, although wicked, decisions. Their prying eyes followed Elk, tracking him. Their skinny legs glided swiftly, and their long toes turned the dirt along the path. They scurried along, using hands that dangled to the ground to increase their speed. Elk was half humming and half singing when the sound of a breaking tree limb put him on edge. He stopped dead in his tracks and listened. "Who's there?" Elk asked. The silence sent chills down his spine as his imagination ran wild. Now, a bit alarmed, he scanned the edges of the road as he extended his short legs to carry him further faster. Shifting shadows moved in the darkness behind the trees of the forest. The crackling of a limb sent qualms of mounting fear through Elk. Looking over his shoulder, all he could see was imaginary silhouettes in the darkness, shifting alongside the trees. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest as he heard a faint whisper. A shadow rose in one place and fell in another. As Elk neared the fork in the road at Shilly Shally 4, one derv said to the other, "Let's have some fun with this guy." Divulging his sharp dun teeth, the other grinned diabolically, loving the excitement. Scheming and plotting evil were natural for them. They loved it. They lived for it. It was in their blood. "Then his blood will be mingled with the dirt," said the other, his voice growing louder with increasing enthusiasm. "Shh! You idiot! He will hear us," said the first, keeping his eye on Elk from behind the veil of night. Hearing a noise among the trees, Elk decreased his gait to a slow and uncertain walk as he surveyed his surroundings. He could feel that someone was watching him. Then he heard movement beyond the trees. Trying to dismiss the racket, he told himself that it was just an animal. But his imagination ran wild, suggesting something more sinister. Scurrying further ahead and turning the corner at the fork in the road, the first derv hunkered down behind the brush at the edge of the path and waited. The second followed on his heels. The two now watched Elk as he approached the fork in the road as Shally followed. With intent to harm, they rasped their claws in the dirt, anxious to draw blood. As he came near, they darted out of the thick of the woods, raked their claws across him, and plowed the lad over, knocking him into the swampy lagoon. With a splash, Elk fell headlong into the stagnant water. "Blasted!" he said, trying to stand up. "What was that?" he said aloud, frightened. Elk felt pain resonating across his chest. Running his hand over his shirt, he could feel the shredded fabric. Raising his shirt, he caught a glimpse of his torn flesh. Frightened, Elk could feel his legs trembling beneath the water. His heart pounded in his chest, sending waves of anxiety through his body. Peeking between some blades of swamp grass, Elk didn't see anything and concluded that whatever it was must have run off. Hunkered down behind the weeds, the derves waited for him to crawl out of the water. "Rats! I'm all wet!" Grabbing a sturdy-looking vine that hung on the edge of the water, he tried to pull himself up. Just as he began to gain some leverage, the chute broke and Elk fell backwards into the water. "Oh, blasted vine!" he said, trying to haul himself through the mud and up the embankment. "Ouch!" he yelped as something sharp sliced his hand. Blood poured on the surface of his skin and ran down the tip of his forefinger. Pulling out a wet handkerchief from his back pocket, Elk one-handedly tied the cloth around his hand, tightening it by pulling one corner with his crooked teeth. Now Elk was curious to find out what had caused this injury. Digging through the mud, Elk pulled out a sharp steel sword. He washed away the layers of mud and immediately noticed the glimmering gems on the handle. The hilt was decorated with diamond-shaped ruby stones surrounding an emblazoned diadem inlaid with gold. The rubies danced in the moonlight with a hypnotic movement. It was an exquisite sword, truly the work of a master craftsman. As he gripped its handle, the sword seemed to radiate with power, making Elk feel strong and invincible. "A new sword! I've been awaiting me a new sword," Elk soliloquized. Elk had longed to be a knight, but lacked the skill or discipline to make the cut. The two derves peered through the trees, trying to see what Elk was doing, curious that he had not yet emerged from the embankment. From where they were, all they could see was the top of his muddy head.
"Let's go in after him and take him there,"
said the first derv.
No, let's wait."
Standing in waist-deep, murky water, Elk swung the sword to the left and then to the right. As waves of power coursed through his body, Elk suddenly recalled an ancient legend. "Ah, I know what you are. I've heard tales about you," he whispered. Captivated by the energy the sword manufactured, Elk held it in disbelief, bewitched by its power. Finally, he came to his senses, realizing he was still standing in the swamp. He started to pull himself up the slippery embankment, but slid backwards, getting wet all over again. Thrusting his left hand into the mud to try to stop his fall, Elk felt something beneath the mire. After regaining his steadiness, he noticed a glint of white through the moonlight. He reached down and pulled at the object. To his horror, a skeletal hand popped out of the muck. Aghast, he jerked, and forgetting to let go of the hand, pulled the torso of the corpse out of the mud. Screaming in terror, he stared into the frozen face of the grim remains of a stiff corpse. Hysterical, Elk dropped the sword and managed to scramble up the embankment. Frantic and scared, he was intending to run as fast as he could to the city when suddenly He felt the power of the sword reaching at his immortal soul, enticing him, even claiming him as its possessor. Elk tugged at the tuft of his hair on his head as he wrestled with what he should do. His thoughts took on every option. Leave the sword and pretending you never laid eyes upon it. No, go back and get it. It's yours. But what if the legends be true? Yea, but even if they are, I'm different. Why, I will get into the school of knights and be the best knight ever. Well, Elk dreamed of becoming a knight, but was yet to get accepted into the school. In truth, his ambitions of leisure were far greater than his disciplines in the nobility of knighthood. As a result, Elk had temporarily settled on the order of knights that stuck strictly to acts of goodwill rather than acts of gallantry in combat, which, according to most, was no order of knights at all. Strictly speaking, this humanitarian order was a far cry from knighthood. In truth, the order was formed out of community need, and a title had been given simply to entice volunteers. Most true knights snubbed their noses at the idea of hospitable order of knighthood, failing to recognize the efforts of peace as being equal with those of combat. With some reluctancy, Elk climbed down the embankment, cringing at the corpse. He picked up the sword. Immediately, a surge of power rushed through him. This force, this energy, flooded him with fresh vigor. He held the sword in his hand and swung it cautiously. As he felt its power, caution turned to confidence. Suddenly, he recalled some of the ancient tales he had heard, tales of its prior possessors, and how they ruled ruthlessly with it. Fear began to mount in Elk's heart. I don't want to become like them, he whispered. I must bury it back where I found it and forget that I haven't laid eyes upon it. He began to push the sword into the mud, immersing the blade, when a swell of energy arose, instigating an internal debate. As the internal debate raged, a jolt of confidence strangled all doubt and subsided all anxiety. I can use it for the good of humanity. That's it. I can make something good out of it, he reasoned, putting confidence in his will to override the curse. Looking round, he pulled the sword from the mud and drew it close to himself and scaled up the embankment as peals of thunder resounded in the heavens. Swinging the sword, Elk felt its power reaching into his soul, calling him, claiming him. The two derves were peering through the trees to see what had been occupying their prey. Seeing Elk bearing a sword, they studied it. The sword was large, double-edged. The moonlight captured the rubies, hues of crimson dancing in the tree limbs. There was a presence about the sword, a certain air of importance and energy. The derves felt the power the sword generated. It held their attention, arresting them.
That looks like the sword of Darvan,
hissed one. They moved closer to get a better look at the impressive sword. A penetrating force confirmed their suspicions, gripping their already large egos.
Why, it's just as the ancient prophecy says.
The derv repeated the prophecy with a wily rasp.
The land of Shally that seeks to be redeemed. You sought for peace, but instead found a sword
at the fork in the road of Shilly Ford. Now your way of peace will come to an end.
With division among you, how will you defend? Your kingdom divided will not stand. You will be no more in this land. For down, you will fall. The quest for power will fool you all. For the sword of Darvan will create discord, and you will cut your own throats with your own sword. Come on, let's go tell Darvan, said the second derv.
Elk, wet and muddy, hastened down the path, leaving his fishing pole and fish behind. Like fool's gold in a scholar's pocket, Elk clutched the sword close to his chest in complete awareness of the atrocious tales associated with the sword. With renewed confidence and excitement, he sang the song of the knights in a strong alto pitch as he skipped along the dirt path. This was the rhapsodic song that he sang. I pledge myself to be courageous, strong, and brave, to protect our citizens from the evil way. I will fight for my country, my king, and my God. Stand with my brothers like two peas in a pod. For this is the pledge of the song of the night, to walk with integrity in the kingdom of the light, standing for the truth, doing what's right. When the kingdom is threatened, we fight, fight, fight. A knight must demonstrate compassion and nobility, carrying his sword in honor, truth, and humility, when lending a hand to those in need, defending the kingdom against the evil seed. For this is the pledge of the song of the night, to walk with integrity in the kingdom of the light, standing for the truth and doing what's right. When our kingdom is threatened, we fight, fight, fight. Well, finding the cursed sword of Darvan was most unexpected. It ruining his life? Well, that he should have expected, since ruining lives is what it has always done. But it leading to global war and the end of all things as they knew it, well, that he never expected, since he was not acquainted with the ancient prophecies. And the finding of the sword at Shally Ford as being noteworthy, this he had not a clue about either. Elk, wet and muddy, hastened down the path, leaving his fishing pole and fish behind. Like fool's gold in a scholar's pocket, Elk clutched the sword close to his chest in complete awareness of the atrocious tales associated with the sword. He refused, however, to believe the sword to be anything less than a spectacular find.